Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be talking about things that I love in books. So this is sort of the opposite of a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, I don't remember when, I did a video called Things I Hate in Books, specific to romance in, romance books. And so I had originally thought that I would right away do a Things I Love in romance books, but then, I just kind of had a hard time coming up with my list, but then I had some inspiration. So here we go. We're going to go through it. I have quite a list here of things that I love in books, and I think this will be really interesting because while, I tried to make these things that... So most of the things on this list are things that will make a book for me. If a book has one of these things in here done really, really well, a lot of times that will be enough for me to overlook any other flaws maybe that I might see, unless they're deal breakers from my things I hate in books, I feel like these cover a multitude of sins. These will make up for a lot of problems in books if this specifically is strong enough. So I feel like this is going to be very specific to me, but maybe you can relate to this too. I think you can for sure on at least some of these. And I will have the things I hate in books linked down below if you haven't watched it and you want to kind of see one or the other. And if you feel the same, or maybe I don't know, I find these videos just so fascinating, and this is why I love really in-depth reviews. I don't want to just hear a star rating. I want to know why did you love it and why did you hate it? So hopefully that's the content that you're getting from me today. So the first thing that I wrote down in here, things that I love in books, is tension. I need there to be a good amount of tension in the book. So that means that even if the couple got together right away, a lot of times in historical romance that will happen where they have some type of marriage of convenience, or somebody's been ruined and they need to get married, there has to be some element of tension in the relationship, or some type of outside force creating that tension that compels me to continue reading, or I get bored. This is really one of the number one things that I need in order to not be bored. It doesn't necessarily even have to be something huge. Tension can be something just really, really, really subtle, it's a forbidden interaction and they are stealing touches of a hand. It doesn't have to be anything huge, but I need that author to maintain a fairly high amount of tension all throughout the book, even if they get together early on. If they get together early on, that's not always a deal breaker for me, but I need there to be some source of tension that is making you wonder, how is this going to work out? Do they really love each other? Is this, what's going to happen? That's basically it. So this is sort of that element, when you're reading a mystery that's compelling you to continue turning the pages. It's who did it? What's going to happen? That's what I feel like tension in romance is for me. It's something that I really need because I'm I need to know, I need to find out how this is going to work out for this couple, That's what keeps me flipping pages more so than I love to see them happy together at the end. I love to see happy moments sprinkled in there throughout the middle, but I need there also to be some tension where I'm kind of questioning and wondering, is this actually going to work out? I mean, we know it's going to work out because they're going to get a happily ever after, and that's why I feel like I need a high level of tension, because then it's more fun for me to read. Okay, so now this one is something that I think is pretty specific to me too. It is sweeping storylines that span years. I think of a really good example, not a good example, but something like a period piece drama, like a movie or a series that is spanning many years, and it's the same couple. I love this so much. I think The Kingmaker Duet by Kennedy Ryan does this really, really well. It spans a lot of years, a lot of their lifetime. It's also very high tension and high angst. But another single book that does this really well for me is The Duke by Catherine Ashe. That's actually one of the things I love about this, was that feeling of an epic love story being told as these two sort of star-crossed lovers met, had this powerful connection, were separated, and find their way back to each other. I really, really love that. So I don't need to necessarily see all of the time that they've been apart, but time jumps for this reason don't bother me, because I want, not always, but I love a sweeping romance that spans a lot of years. I just think that's beautiful to see, and I, for one, adore it. And those are some of the most satisfying romances that I've ever read, rather than just a really hot and heavy weekend. Like, that's boring to me, you know? Okay, something else that I really love, and obviously this isn't like unique to me, is like I want there to be longing in this couple. I want to be able to feel the longing on both sides of them wanting to be with this person so badly, but for some reason they just can't be. Like, I love it. I love it so much. Another one that is pretty similar to this, but is definitely like one-sided for me, is A Pining Hero. I want it to smell like Christmas. I want pine fresh. I want that hero to have pined for the heroine. And again, like, these things are not things that I need in every book, but when I come across them and it's done really well, I'm just like, fantastic. So I want a hero to pine for the heroine. I don't love a pining heroine for the hero, although I mean, Ravishing the Heiress does that, and that book really worked for me. Probably because it has a lot of other elements of things that I like in there, like high angst, a lot of tension, just beautiful prose, things like that. But I love it when a hero has just pined for the heroine for years. Secretly pined. It's just fantastic. Okay, so this one I think is also pretty specific to me, and this is, I love subtlety when it comes to physical touch. I am not the type of reader that needs, like, extremely explicit scenes on page 2. I honestly am so tired of that. I feel like that's kind of a direction that especially indie romances are headed. And I just am always, I read that and I get disappointed because I'm like, why do I care this early that much is happening? It's not exciting to me. It's not spicy to me. It honestly is just not interesting at all because I don't care about these characters. I'm not interested really in just reading the sex act. I don't care how hot that it is. I need to be invested in the characters. So for me, this is one reason why I love Mary Belloc, and I think that Lisa Kleypas does this really well in some of her books too, a lot of her books. And it's the subtle gestures and touches of like a hand on her back, moving a hair, a curl away from her face, like a pinky down the back of her hand. Like, honestly, it just gets me so bad. And when I see this in a contemporary romance, and especially in indie romance, I am so impressed because I feel like a lot of times in indie romance, it's oftentimes a sledgehammer approach instead of done with subtlety and nuance. And I get it, that sells a lot of books. I know I'm the odd one out, but I want to see more of those romantic gestures. This is also one of the main reasons why I loved The Lady Gets Lucky by Joanna Shupe, is because I felt like so much of that book was built on these very slow, seductive moments between the two of them that wasn't just hot and heavy all the time. You know, it was kissing, it was touching, it was the art of seduction, and I just adored it so freaking much. So I love that. I love it so much. Every time that I see it, like, I almost always get butterflies. I just think it's one of my favorite things. Something else I love is unique settings. So this was really made obvious to me when I read A Caribbean Heiress in Paris. I loved this, and this one goes hand in hand with my next one. I loved how unique it was when, in the sea of historical romances that are almost entirely set in England or Scotland, I loved how unique and different this was. We were in 3 different locations the whole way of the book, and it was just such a fun twist on something that still felt familiar. I really, really love a very unique setting, but I want it to still have reminiscence of familiarity in the genre that I'm reading, and I just love that so much. And I feel like Beverly Jenkins does this really, really well too, because even though her books are set in America, they're often Westerns, and she has that feeling of a classic, lush, historical romance in the couple, in the romance, in the interaction, even in the plots, but it's all in a different location, even if it's just somewhere simple like America, when most historical romances are obviously set in England. It feels fresh and unique and new, and I just really, really love that. And this goes right into the next one, is something that I really love in romances is having diverse characters, diverse relationships, diverse lifestyles. Things that make me consider another person's lived experience. Like, I wrote that on my notes because I wanted to make sure and make that clear that I personally love reading about things that are different than what my life is exposed to. Like, I love reading about someone else's experience that is different than mine. And, you know, like for a lot of reasons, that was one of the main draws for me to A Lady for a Duke, because I was just like, this is something that is new for me that I've never really experienced, and I was just really curious to see how it would play out, and it did something that I want to happen when I read something like that, is that it created in me this huge sense of empathy for these characters and for the situation that they found themselves in, and how beautiful it was to see someone just truly living and being themselves. The heroine in this book is a trans woman, and I was just completely captivated with her journey. And that's really what I think is so powerful and beautiful about reading diversely and reading about things that aren't, you know, so close to what your own experience is. I want to be a more empathetic person. I want to have more love and understanding for things that I don't see in my everyday life, you know? And so that's something that I really, 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 really love in my romance. And so this is another, like, sort of a common theme. I'm just reading off of the notes that I made in my phone, but something else that I really love is something that is very familiar to us. Like, most people have had their first kiss, and so we know what that experience is like. But, you know, depending on when that happened in our life and how old we are, we could feel a little removed from that. So I love when something that is a very familiar experience is taken and, like, elevated to, like, the next level, where it feels very fresh, where it feels like you're in that moment, and where it feels so new and real to you. But this also isn't just, like, about kisses. Like, I love when anything familiar is elevated. So, like, I'm thinking about the first book in the Filthy series, when she wants to open a bakery, and I just felt like that was just such a tiny little simple unique detail, but it was made fresh and new because it was a mafia romance and she wants to own a bakery. Like, I just really, really love that. So anything that is very familiar, anything that seems like a tired concept, when the author is able to present that in a way that feels very fresh and new and very, like, sensory, I just love that so much. And that all comes down to writing, that author's writing. If they're able to, I think for me it works best when they're able to get that feeling across in not a lot of words. It's so fantastic. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to talk about A Lady for a Duke again. This book really made me realize the things that I love in romance, and so I'm going to use this as an example again. But the very specific one in here is when the characters have vulnerabilities, but then they have vulnerabilities and they're sharing them very tentatively with their partner or with the love interest. And then to have that vulnerability, like, immediately affirmed by their partner, it just, like, sends me into a tizzy of happiness. Like, I honestly love that so much, because I just love that moment. And it doesn't always happen in every romance novel, but to me, I feel like that's something that is needed for a romance to really hit me, is that moment of trust and being vulnerable, and then having that trust, like, affirmed, like, yes, I want you still, and you were right to trust me. And I think that's just such a beautiful part of a relationship, and it's not always done in a way that hits me perfectly, but it was in here, and I loved it so much. Okay, so this is another one that is, I think, pretty specific to me, and this is one reason why I don't like alpha holes overall. Like, I love an alpha mellow. I love an alpha man who puts the needs of his partner first. I don't love alpha holes who try to force and get their woman to do what they want because they believe it's for her best good. Like, I just don't love that, because something that always strikes me in romances that just, like, speaks to my soul is when one partner, and usually it hits me more if it's the hero, but not always, sacrifices their personal desires for their partner's happiness. This is something that I always look for, and there are a few books that I feel like have done this perfectly, and one of them is The Day of the Duchess by Sarah MacLean. That final gesture in the end of that book was just that all wrapped up in a bow. But another book that I read that is a reason why it's one of my favorite books of the year is Savage Tracker, because everything that this hero does is for her happiness. And some of it is a sacrifice on his part. Some of it is just that that's what brings him happiness. But the thing that makes it work so well here is just because of how powerful he is in the mafia and just as a very powerful man, but also the power that she is allowing him to have over her. It's just such a satisfying dynamic, and I just absolutely loved seeing it done here. It was beautiful. So if you remember, if you're watching this to the end and you have books that have this specific thing in it to recommend to me, if you have any books to recommend to me that have these things I'm talking about, please let me know in the comments, because I will compile a TBR and they will be priority for me to read, because I feel like one of the reasons I wanted to make this video is because I feel like a lot of books that I've been reading this year are lacking in some of these areas, and it's just not hitting me right, and I want to find more of these so badly. So if you have recs for me for anything that you think hits these, let me know, okay? Okay, next one. Another thing I really, really love is atmospheric descriptions. I think that descriptions of the setting can kind of be boring if it goes too far, if they get too wordy in their descriptions, if it's not done with enough sensory details to make you feel that setting. And that's why I feel like really atmospheric books make that work for me. And the series that I always think of when I think of a very atmospheric setting is the Victorian Rebels series by Kerrigan Byrne. In general, I feel like she is an extremely atmospheric writer. She does dread very well. She does steam and heat very well. She does longing very well. Like, everything that she writes, and this is one reason why I think she works for me so well, is really handled perfectly for me in a way that makes me feel every single thing that she's writing. So I think that when I think of an atmospheric writer, I always think of Kerrigan Byrne, but specifically her Victorian Rebels series, because that setting in there is so like tactile and she doesn't even do a lot of describing of the setting. It's more like how the characters are interacting, and there is some descriptions of the setting, but just you get such a vivid idea of what that time and place looks like that it's unforgettable. All right, so I included this one because this is something that I love, but this is not something that I have to have. A lot of times what I want when I say that the writing quality was poor, most of the time all that I want, and I got this phrase, a turn of phrase, this is something that I've been thinking for a long time, but Mari from My Name is Marines on TikTok and YouTube, she said this so well. She wants her writing to be good enough not to be distracting. And I was like, yes, that is exactly it. Like, a lot of the times when I'm reading, I don't want to be noticing the writing. I just want to be caught up in the story. And if the writing isn't at a level for me where I feel like it becomes invisible and all I feel is the story, then it's like it's pulling me out of the story all the time, you know? So I don't need... Did I even tell you what this one is? I don't need beautiful prose. That's what this one is. I don't need beautiful prose in all of my books. To be completely honest, I prefer to not even notice the writing. I just want to get swept up in the story. It's when the writing becomes a stumbling block for me, when the quality isn't high enough for me, where it's impossible for me to really get swept away in the story. But all of that being said, I absolutely am an English nerd, and I die over beautiful prose. Beautiful prose is just something that you read it and you're just like, oh my gosh, yes. And you highlight it and you tab it. And so that's something that I love, but it's definitely not something that I need in every book. But when I read that and I notice it, I'm just like, absolutely. And the queen of this for me is Kennedy Ryan. All of her books, honestly, every single thing on my list, you could say Kennedy Ryan has that. To me, there is no finer author than her. I think she is absolutely perfection. She is the top of her craft. She is a fantastically emotional, beautiful, steamy writer, and I love all of her books. So, but something that I definitely notice she does really well is beautiful prose, but she also is able to pull it back and have the writing just be invisible, so you're just caught up in the story. So we love Kennedy Ryan here. I'm her #1 fan for sure. Okay, so this next one is one that I love so much, and this happened in a few books that I read over the weekend, and it is that realization moment when usually the hero, but not always, but usually when that hero has this moment where they realize, I cannot live without this person. I cannot live without this person. That is just so satisfying for me when that moment hits them and they realize that they were wrong. Everything they thought about love was wrong. Everything they thought about the opposite sex or the same sex was wrong. And they are just like, yes, I must have you. I cannot live without you. It's a beautiful thing. This one is kind of a little change in topic, but something I really love is good food descriptions. I love it so much. I love the way food is described in books if it's done really, really well, especially if it's like something sort of like, not like country-ish like we would think in like America, but like something in England that is maybe not like an aristocracy food, but something like very common, mundane. I'm just like salivating over this description of like biscuits. And maybe that's because I can't have gluten. But anyway, I love good food descriptions. Okay, something else that is very high up there on something that I love so much is loving and accepting your partner for who they are in this moment. And this often happens at the end of the book. Like, I feel like it almost has to happen at the end. I love when the couple reaches the end and they have their happily ever after, and they recognize that this person isn't perfect, but I love and accept them for who they are right now. So all the struggles that they had to get through to get to this end point was worth it because I love them and I accept them and love them for who they are right now, and I have no desire to try and make them change. And a book that did that really, really well was Run, Posey, Run. Like, I feel like a lot of what I love about this book is the heroine's, like, internal journey of thinking that she's in love with this man, to realizing that that love was maybe a sham, and why was she settling for so little, to then also realizing, but I don't really want to live without him, and am I able to love him for who he is, flaws and all. Now, the hero also undergoes a bit of a journey, changing in his point of view of what love is, and if he's capable of love in a way that's going to make her be happy or to satisfy her. So that was honestly just one of the favorite things about this book, and that made it work so well for me, was watching them both have this journey and desire to change, mostly the hero desire to change, but the heroine also being willing to recognize that, you know what, I do love him and he's not perfect, but I accept him for who he is right now. And I just thought it was perfect. I loved that here. Okay, another thing that I really love in romances is parents that are really involved, that are guiding, that are loving, that are very accepting. Maybe not really involved, but like they're good parents, you know? Like, I love seeing that, even whether they're adoptive parents, whether they're grandparents, whether they're a parent figure. I love when parents are loving and they're offering a little bit of guidance, but they're overall just very accepting and wanting to see. Like, I love a family unit in romances, and this is something that I just really, really love when I see it. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that most YA books have very terrible parents, and even new adult books, so it's just such a nice thing to see parents who are just very supportive and loving and engaged in their adult child's life. Like, I just love that so much. Something else I really love is a comedic relief character. I feel like a lot of times in romances that can be the character for a future book in the series. Like, we'll get to see that character's romance later on, but depending on the tone of the book, I feel like this is almost always something that I really love. If things get too heavy or too serious, there's always that one character who's like, quit being such a dummy, and there's this moment of lightness, and I just really, really love that. And I always appreciate a comedic relief character in a romance. Unless it's like something that is super heavy and, you know, not in the right place. You know what I mean? Like, there's a time and a place for that, and it's not in every romance book, but when it's there and it's the right place, I'm just like, I love it so much. It's perfect. I'm not going to elaborate on this one, but this one is very important to me, and this is pets that don't die. Please don't introduce a pet and then kill it off. Please. Please don't do that in a romance. I don't want it at all, ever. Okay, so these two I'm going to pair together. And this could have gone with the beginning when I was talking about tension. If I'd been smarter about organizing this, I would have done that. But this is high stakes and angst. Angst, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. Angst, to me, is that internal conflict, something internal where they're really struggling with, should we be together? Sometimes it's like a moral issue, like if it's a taboo romance, or if it's an age gap, or something that is forbidden, or sometimes it's external stuff that is causing the angst. But for me, angst is most satisfying when it's an internal process, where it's not something coming in from outside, you know? So angst, I love it. I need angst. Those are my favorite romances, but also high stakes. And I think high stakes can be confusing because, you know, like when I say high stakes, I don't necessarily mean like a bomb is coming or the world is ending or like somebody's going to kill them, but it needs to feel very high stakes. Like the fate of this character's happiness, eternal happiness, is swinging so hard on this one thing that the stakes feel very, very high. I personally love that. If the stakes are really low, sometimes I'm in a mood for a really low stakes read, but most of the time I want the stakes to be moderately to very high, because that's what keeps me invested and turning those pages. You know what I mean? So there needs to be some stakes involved where I'm like, but why? You know, like, why are we reading about this couple if if it doesn't really matter, you know? Like, I need a reason why this is a book. Okay, so for my final one that I have on this list, this is something that I noticed this year that I really, really loved, and it was done really well in this book for me, The Good Girl's Guide to Rakes by Ava Leigh, and that is when attraction propels the love interest to see the other character in ways that are other than that person is so hot, I'm so attracted to them, you know? I feel like there was a few scenes in the beginning of this book that illustrated that perfectly, where this couple, they had an attraction. They both thought that they were attractive people, and they had this sort of chemistry between them. But it was that attraction that then led to the hero seeing moments with the heroine, or seeing her just live her life, where he was like, seeing her for who she was, like he was able to see beyond her beauty. You know what I mean? So I feel like if you're going to make all of the characters super, super beautiful, I also want to see that their partner or their love interest is seeing them than more than a body or a face. You know, I want to see it on page that attraction has led to them to see who this person really is, and that's what leads them to love. Not just, this person is so beautiful, the sex is so good, we're in love. Like, I am so tired of that crap, I can't even tell you. I am sick of it. So if you have books like that, don't recommend them to me, because no, I don't want them. I'm bored with that concept. You know, like, I just can't even express how distasteful it is to me when it is all about how beautiful, how hot, and how good the sex is. I just don't care. I could not care less at all. So, all right. There we have it. Those are the things that I love in books. This is not an exhaustive list, but these were the things that were at the top of my mind when I thought about filming this video, so I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know any comments, if any agrees or disagrees, or books you have to recommend for me, and I'll see y'all in my next video.